James was a very rich man who lived in a big mansion in the city. He owned many companies and had more money than he could ever count. He drove expensive cars and wore fancy suits every day. Everyone in the city knew his name and respected him because of his wealth. People bowed when they saw him and called him Sir. James was married to a beautiful woman named Grace. Grace was kind and gentle with a warm smile that could light up any room. She loved James with all her heart, even though he was often cold and distant. Grace did everything to make James happy, but he never seemed satisfied with anything she did or said. Grace came from a poor family in the village. Her father was a farmer and her mother sold vegetables in the small market. James met Grace when she was working as a waitress in a restaurant. He was attracted to her beauty and simple nature. Grace thought James was her prince who would give her a better life. When James married Grace, his family was very angry with him. His mother said Grace was too poor and not good enough for their family. His father refused to attend the wedding ceremony. James did not care at that time because he loved Grace in his own way, but his family's words stayed in his mind like poison. After the wedding, James started treating Grace badly. He would come home late and shout at her for small mistakes. If the food was too hot or too cold, he would throw the plate on the floor. Grace would clean up quietly with tears in her eyes. She prayed every night that James would change back to the man she married. James's mother visited the mansion often to make trouble. She would insult Grace and call her names in front of the servants. She told James that Grace was only after his money. James's mother said Grace would trap him with a baby and then take everything he owned. These evil words slowly changed James's heart against his innocent wife. Grace tried her best to win over James's family. She cooked special meals and bought them expensive gifts with the little money James gave her. But nothing worked because they had already decided to hate her. Grace cried alone in her room, many nights feeling lonely and unwanted in the big mansion that felt like a prison. One day, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She was so happy and excited to tell James the news. Grace thought a baby would bring them closer together and make their family complete. She prepared James's favorite meal and waited for him to come home. She wore her best dress and practiced how she would tell him the good news. When James came home that evening, Grace told him about the baby with a big smile on her face. But James did not smile back at her. His face turned dark and angry. James accused Grace of trying to trap him just like his mother had warned. Grace was shocked and hurt by his words and tried to explain, but James would not listen. James called his mother immediately and told her about the pregnancy. His mother came to the mansion within an hour. She told James that Grace had planned this to secure her future with his money. James's mother said Grace was a gold digger who would ruin their family name. Grace begged them to believe that she truly loved James, but they both laughed at her. From that day forward, James treated Grace like a stranger in their own home. He moved to a different bedroom and refused to speak to her. The servants saw everything but could not help because they feared losing their jobs. Grace felt so alone and scared, thinking about raising a baby in such a cold and loveless environment. As Grace's belly grew bigger, James grew more distant and cruel. He would bring other women to the house and parade them in front of Grace. He wanted to hurt her and show her that she meant nothing to him anymore. Grace's heart broke into a million pieces, but she endured everything for the sake of her unborn baby. Grace's family in the village did not know what was happening. Grace was too ashamed to tell them about her suffering. She sent them letters saying everything was fine and that she was very happy. Her mother wrote back saying how proud they were that Grace had married such a rich and successful man who could give her everything. 9 months passed like a slow torture for Grace. She had no friends in the city and no one to talk to about her pain. The servants pitied her but kept their distance. Grace spent her days walking around the big empty mansion, talking to her unborn baby. She promised the baby that she would love it enough for both parents. One evening, Grace felt sharp pains in her stomach. She was 9 months pregnant and knew the baby was coming soon. She called out to James, who was in his study counting his money and looking at his business papers. Grace held her belly and told him they needed to go to the hospital right away. The pains were getting stronger and closer together. James looked at Grace with angry eyes filled with disgust and hatred. He had been in a bad mood all day because one of his business deals had failed. He lost millions of dollars because his partner had cheated him. James blamed Grace for distracting him and told her she was the reason he was losing money and his business was suffering. Grace tried to explain that the baby was coming and she needed help immediately. But James stood up and started shouting at her. He said he was tired of her face and tired of her presence in his house. James told Grace that he never wanted the baby and never wanted her. His words cut through Grace's heart like sharp knives. James grabbed Grace roughly by the arm and dragged her toward the front door. Grace begged him to stop and take her to the hospital. She cried and screamed that the baby was coming, but James refused to listen to her desperate pleas. The servants heard the commotion and came running, but they were too afraid to interfere with their master's anger. James opened the front door and pushed Grace out into the cold night with all his strength. Grace fell hard on the concrete ground outside the gate, crying and holding her stomach in terrible pain. She looked back at James standing in the doorway and could not believe this was the same man she had married 2 years ago. James threw Grace's small bag of clothes at her. He shouted that she should go back to her poor village family where she belonged. James said he never wanted to see her face again as long as he lived. Then he slammed the door shut, leaving Grace alone in the darkness with nowhere to go and no one to help her. The security guard at the gate was shocked when he saw what happened. His name was Peter, and he had always been kind to Grace. He wanted to help Grace, but James shouted at him from the window to stay away. James told Peter that if he helped Grace, he would lose his job immediately, and he would make sure Peter never worked anywhere in the city again. Peter stepped back in fear because he had a wife and 3 children to feed. He watched helplessly as Grace struggled on the ground trying to stand up. Peter felt like a coward, but he needed his job desperately. He turned away from Grace with tears in his eyes, feeling ashamed of himself. Grace saw Peter turn away and felt completely abandoned by the whole world. Grace tried to stand up, but the pain was too much for her weak body. She crawled slowly down the street looking for help, but all the houses were dark and locked. Nobody heard her cries in the quiet, wealthy neighborhood where people minded their own business. The pain in her belly grew stronger, and Grace knew she did not have much time left before the baby came. Grace's dress was torn and dirty from crawling on the rough ground. Her knees were bleeding, and her hands were scraped raw. But she kept moving forward because she had to find help for her baby. Grace prayed to God, asking why this was happening to her. She wondered what she had done to deserve such cruelty from the man she loved. After crawling for many painful minutes, Grace reached the main road. She lay there on the cold pavement, unable to move anymore. Her whole body was shaking from pain and fear. Cars drove past her without stopping, and people walked by without offering help. Grace felt hopeless and scared and thinking she would die alone on the street with her unborn baby. One car slowed down and Grace felt a moment of hope. But when the driver saw her condition, he quickly drove away, not wanting to get involved. Another person walked past and Grace reached out her hand begging for help, but the person pulled away in disgust and hurried off. Grace realized that nobody cared about a poor woman suffering on the street. Grace started feeling the baby moving down. She knew she would give birth right there on the cold street. She cried out in pain and fear, praying for a miracle. Grace thought about her mother and father in the village. She wished she had never left them to marry James. She wished she had listened when they said James might not treat her well. Then a small wooden cart stopped beside her. It was Moses, a poor hawker who sold fruits and vegetables from his old wooden cart. Moses was returning home after a very long day of work when he saw Grace lying on the road in obvious distress. He jumped down from his cart and rushed to her side immediately without any hesitation. Moses asked Grace what was wrong, and she told him the baby was coming right now. Moses looked around desperately, hoping someone with a car would help, but the street was now empty. Everyone had gone home for the night. He knew he had to act fast, so he lifted Grace gently and placed her carefully on his cart among the fruits and vegetables. Moses pushed his cart as fast as his tired legs could carry him. He ran through the streets heading to the nearest hospital, which was very far away on the other side of the city. Sweat poured down his face and his muscles ached terribly, but he did not stop even for a second. Grace moaned in pain, and Moses kept telling her everything would be all right very soon. Moses' feet were bleeding because his old shoes had holes in them. His lungs burned from running so hard, but he kept going. Other hawkers saw him and asked what was wrong, but Moses did not stop to explain. He just kept running and pushing the cart with all the strength he had left in his tired body. After running for what felt like forever, Moses finally reached the small government hospital. He was gasping for air and could barely stand. He carried Grace inside and called for the nurses loudly with whatever breath he had left. The nurses came running and took Grace to the delivery room immediately. They asked Moses who he was, and he said he was just someone who found her on the street. The nurses told Moses that Grace needed an emergency operation. The baby was in a difficult position and might not survive without proper medical intervention. They said the operation would cost a lot of money and asked Moses if he could pay. Moses checked his pockets and found only the money he had earned that day from selling fruits. Moses counted his money carefully. It was not enough for the operation. He asked the nurses how much more he needed, and when they told him, his heart sank. That amount was more than he earned in 3 months of hard work. Moses stood there not knowing what to do as Grace's screams echoed from the delivery room. Moses made a quick decision. He ran back outside to where he had left his cart. He sold his cart to another hawker for whatever money he could get quickly. The cart was his only means of making a living, but Moses did not hesitate. He took the money and ran back inside the hospital to pay for Grace's operation and treatment. Moses gave all the money to the hospital staff. They counted it and said it was just enough for the operation, but not for the medications and recovery. Moses said he would find a way to pay for the rest later. The doctors took Grace into the operating room, and Moses waited outside praying that both Grace and her baby would survive this terrible night. 3 long hours passed and Moses sat on the cold hospital floor. He had not eaten anything since morning and was exhausted from running. But he could not leave because he wanted to know if Grace and the baby were okay. Other people in the hospital looked at him strangely, wondering why this poor hawker cared so much about a woman he did not know. Finally, a nurse came out with a small smile on her tired face. She told Moses that Grace had given birth to a healthy baby boy through the emergency operation. Both mother and baby had survived, but it had been a very close call. Moses felt tears of joy roll down his dirty cheeks, even though Grace was a complete stranger to him. The nurse said Grace wanted to see him and thank him for saving both their lives. Moses entered the room nervously and saw Grace lying on the bed looking very weak and pale. She was holding her tiny baby wrapped in a thin white cloth. Grace looked at Moses with tears streaming down her face and could not find words to thank him properly. Grace asked Moses for his name and he told her. She asked him why he helped her when everyone else had ignored her suffering. Moses said he could not just walk away when someone needed help. He told Grace that his own mother had died on the street when he was young because nobody helped her. He did not want the same thing to happen to Grace and her innocent baby. Grace started crying even harder when she heard Moses' story. She held his rough hand and thanked him over and over again. Grace told Moses about James and what had happened that night. Moses listened with shock and anger. He could not believe that any man would throw out his pregnant wife like garbage and leave her to die on the street. Moses asked Grace where she would go when she left the hospital. Grace said she had nowhere to go because James had thrown her out. She could not go back to her village because her family was too poor to support her and a new baby. Grace said she would figure something out, but Moses could see the fear and hopelessness in her eyes. The hospital bill was very expensive, and Grace had no money with her at all. Moses used all his remaining savings to pay the bill without thinking twice about it. It was all the money he had earned and saved from many months of very hard work. Grace promised she would pay him back someday, but Moses said it was a gift from his heart and she should not worry about money. Grace stayed in the hospital for 3 days before the doctor said she was strong enough to leave. She had nowhere to go because James had thrown her out and changed all the locks on the mansion. Grace sat on the hospital bed holding baby Samuel and wondering what she would do now. She felt scared and alone in the big city with no money and no home. Moses came to visit Grace every day after his work. On the 3rd day when Grace was being discharged, Moses made an offer that shocked Grace completely. He offered to let Grace and her baby stay in his small shack near the market until she found a better place to live or figured out what to do with her life. Grace could not believe Moses' kindness and generosity toward complete strangers. She asked Moses if he was sure because she did not want to be a burden to him. Moses insisted and said his small home was not much, but it would keep them safe from the streets. Grace accepted his offer with gratitude and tears because she had no other choice or place to go. Moses took Grace and baby Samuel to his tiny home. The shack had only one small room with old torn mat on the floor and a small rusty stove in the corner for cooking. There was one bucket for water and a tiny window that barely let in any light. Moses gave Grace and the baby the mat, while he said he would sleep outside under the stars every night. Grace felt deeply grateful for Moses's pure kindness and incredible generosity. She could not understand why this poor stranger was helping her so much when her own rich husband had abandoned her. Moses would not accept any special thanks. He just said he was happy he could help someone who needed it, and that was enough reward for him. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. Grace took care of baby Samuel while Moses worked very hard selling fruits in the market from morning until late night. Moses would buy fruits wholesale early in the morning and then walk around the city all day selling them. He made very little profit, but he shared his small earnings with Grace without complaining even once. Grace watched Moses work himself to exhaustion every single day. She saw how he would skip meals to make sure she and Samuel had enough to eat. Moses would come home late at night with his feet swollen and bleeding, but he would still play with Samuel and make him laugh before sleeping. Grace felt deep respect for this humble man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. Grace started helping Moses by preparing fruits in the morning before he left. She would wash them and arrange them nicely so they would sell better. Grace also took care of Moses by preparing hot meals for him when he returned home tired. Moses appreciated Grace's help and care. They became good friends who supported each other through their difficult circumstances. Grace named her baby boy Samuel, which means God heard, because God had heard her prayers that terrible night on the street. Samuel grew into a happy baby who smiled and laughed all the time despite their poverty. Moses loved Samuel like his own son and would play with him whenever he came home from work. He would make funny faces and sing songs to make Samuel giggle. As Samuel grew bigger, Grace started noticing how Moses treated him with so much love and care. Moses would buy Samuel little toys from his small earnings. He would tell Samuel stories at night and teach him new words. Grace compared Moses to James, who had never even wanted Samuel. Grace saw that a man's worth was not in his money, but in his heart. 1 year passed and Grace realized she had developed deep feelings for Moses. She saw his kind heart and selfless nature every single day. Grace watched how Moses treated Samuel with pure love, while James, who had everything, had treated them with cruelty. Moses also had secret feelings for Grace, but never said anything because he felt he was too poor to deserve a woman like her. Grace finally gathered courage and told Moses how she felt about him. She said she loved him for who he was inside, not for what he had outside. Moses was completely surprised and overjoyed to hear her words. He told Grace that he had loved her from the moment he saw her, but thought she would never want a poor man like him, especially after being married to a rich man. Moses and Grace decided to get married in a simple ceremony at the small local church. They had no money for a fancy wedding, but they were genuinely happy together. Little Samuel was their ring bearer, and the few friends they had from the market came to celebrate with them. It was the happiest day of their lives, despite having so little material wealth, but being rich in love. The priest who married them gave them a special blessing. He said their love had been tested by fire and proven true. He told them that many people with money and comfort could not find the happiness they had. Moses and Grace thanked God for bringing them together through difficult circumstances. They promised to love and support each other no matter what challenges life brought them. Years went by slowly, and Moses worked harder than ever before to provide for his new family. Grace helped by selling vegetables beside Moses in the market every single day. She would wake up at 4 in the morning to prepare everything. They saved every single coin they could, and slowly their life got a little better. They were able to buy a few more mats and a better stove. Samuel grew into a smart and kind boy who loved his parents very much. He never complained about their poverty or asked for expensive things. Samuel helped his parents in the market after school by arranging fruits and greeting customers politely. People loved Samuel because he was always smiling and respectful. Many customers would buy extra fruits just because Samuel served them so nicely. Samuel attended the free government school in their area. The school was poor with broken desks and few books, but Samuel studied very hard with whatever resources he had. He would read his books by candlelight at night because they had no electricity in their small home. Moses and Grace felt very proud of Samuel's dedication to his education, despite all the difficulties they faced. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, James became even richer than before. His businesses grew bigger, and he bought more properties around the city and even in other countries. But James was deeply lonely and miserable despite all his incredible wealth and success. He lived in his big mansion all alone, surrounded by servants who feared him and did not genuinely care about him. James could not maintain any meaningful relationships with anyone. He married 2 more women after Grace, hoping to find happiness. The first one was the daughter of another rich businessman, but she only wanted his money and they fought constantly. James divorced her after 6 months. The second wife was a model who James thought loved him, but she was cheating on him with his business partner. After his second divorce, James became even more bitter and angry at the world. He trusted nobody and suspected everyone of wanting to use him. James threw himself into his work, building his empire bigger and bigger, but no amount of money or success could fill the emptiness he felt deep inside his heart. He could not sleep well at night and often had nightmares. James often thought about Grace late at night when he was alone. He wondered what happened to her and the baby after he threw them out that terrible night 9 years ago. Sometimes he felt a small bit of guilt creeping into his cold heart, but he quickly pushed those uncomfortable feelings away. James told himself that Grace was weak and he was better off without her and her baby. James's mother had passed away 2 years after Grace left. Before she died, she told James she was sorry for turning him against Grace. She said Grace had been a good wife and she had been wrong to judge her. But James did not listen even to his dying mother's regret. His heart had become too hard and cold to accept that he might have made a terrible mistake. James surrounded himself with expensive things and meaningless relationships, but felt empty inside every single night. He would sit in his large study drinking expensive wine alone. James had everything money could buy, but nothing that really mattered. He had no one to talk to and no one who genuinely cared whether he lived or died. His servants only stayed because he paid them well. Meanwhile, Samuel continued to excel in his studies. His teachers were amazed by his intelligence and dedication. Samuel always scored the highest marks in his entire class. He was especially good at mathematics and science. Samuel's dream was to become a doctor someday so he could help poor people who could not afford medical treatment, just like someone had helped his mother when he was born. 9 years passed since that terrible night when James threw Grace out in labor. Samuel was now 9 years old and extremely intelligent for his young age. He attended the government school where Moses and Grace continued to struggle to pay his small fees. Sometimes they had to sell extra hours in the market just to afford Samuel's school supplies and uniform. One day, Samuel came home very excited with important news. The school had announced a big mathematics competition for all students in the entire city. Students from every school, both rich private schools and poor government schools, could participate. The winner would receive a full scholarship to the best private school and a large cash prize of $50,000 for their family. Samuel told his parents about the competition with shining eyes full of hope. He said he wanted to try because the scholarship would help them so much. Moses and Grace looked at each other with worry because they knew Samuel would be competing against children from rich families who had everything. But they saw the determination in Samuel's eyes and encouraged him to participate and do his very best. Samuel studied very hard every single night, preparing for the big competition day that was coming. Moses and Grace helped him however they could. Grace would test Samuel with questions, and Moses would encourage him when he felt discouraged. Samuel borrowed extra mathematics books from his teacher and studied them until he understood every single concept perfectly. He barely slept in the weeks leading up to the competition. The competition day finally arrived, and it was held at the biggest and most expensive hotel in the city. Students from rich private schools wearing fancy uniforms arrived in expensive cars with their proud parents. Moses and Grace felt nervous when they saw all these wealthy families. They worried that Samuel would feel inferior, but Samuel seemed confident and focused on the competition ahead. Samuel arrived with Moses and Grace, who wore their best clothes for this special occasion. Their best clothes were still old and worn, but they had washed and ironed them carefully. They looked around at all the wealthy families in designer clothes and expensive jewelry and felt a bit nervous and out of place. But they held their heads high because they were proud of their son Samuel, regardless of their poverty. The competition began, and there were over 100 students participating from schools all across the city. The questions started easy, but got progressively harder with each round. One by one, students were eliminated when they answered incorrectly or took too long to answer. Samuel answered every question calmly and correctly, showing his deep understanding of mathematics. Moses and Grace watched nervously from the audience as the competition continued for hours. They prayed silently that Samuel would do well. They saw rich parents looking down at them with contempt, but they ignored it. All that mattered was supporting their son. Samuel looked at his parents between rounds, and they gave him encouraging smiles that filled him with confidence and determination. After 3 hours of intense competition, only 10 students remained on stage. Samuel was one of them, and he was the only student from a government school. All the other 9 students were from the most expensive private schools in the city. The rich parents whispered among themselves, wondering how a poor boy from a government school had made it so far in such a difficult competition. The questions became extremely difficult now, and even the smart students struggled to answer them. More students were eliminated until only 2 remained standing on the big stage. Samuel was one of them, and a girl named Patricia from the most expensive private school in the city was the other. The entire audience watched in suspense to see who would win the grand prize. The host announced that this was the final question, and whoever answered correctly would win the competition and all the prizes. The question was extremely difficult, involving complex mathematical concepts that even adults would struggle with. The room fell completely silent as everyone waited. Patricia answered first, but her answer was wrong, and she started crying in disappointment and frustration. Now it was Samuel's turn to answer the final question. Samuel closed his eyes and thought carefully about the problem for a long minute. Everyone watched him in complete silence. Then Samuel opened his eyes and gave his answer slowly and confidently, explaining his reasoning step by step. The judges checked his answer carefully and then smiled broadly. Samuel's answer was completely correct in every way. The entire room erupted in applause and cheers for Samuel. Moses and Grace ran to hug their beloved son, with tears of pure joy streaming down their faces. They could not believe their poor boy had just won against all those rich children. Samuel hugged his parents tightly and thanked them for always believing in him and supporting his education, despite their poverty and struggles. The host called Samuel to the stage to receive his prize and scholarship certificate in front of everyone. Samuel walked up proudly, holding both his parents' hands as they accompanied him to the stage together as a family. Moses and Grace stood on either side of Samuel, beaming with pride as photographers took pictures and reporters asked questions about this remarkable boy from the poor government school. James was at the same hotel that day for an important business meeting with international investors. He had finished his meeting early and decided to walk through the hotel lobby to his car. James saw a large crowd gathered in the ballroom and stopped to see what was happening out of mild curiosity. He walked closer and saw it was a mathematics competition for children. James stood at the back of the large room watching the children answer difficult questions on stage. He was bored and about to leave when he heard the host announce the final 2 contestants. Something made James stay and watch. He saw a young boy and a girl standing on stage looking nervous as they faced the final question of the competition. When Samuel answered the final question correctly and won, everyone erupted in applause. James watched with mild interest as a couple rushed to hug the winning boy. Then the host called the family to the stage and they walked up together hand in hand. James moved closer to get a better view of the winning family because something seemed strangely familiar about them. As the family climbed onto the stage under the bright lights, James's eyes focused on the woman. His heart suddenly stopped beating and his blood turned cold. It was Grace standing there on the stage with a young boy and another man. James felt shock and disbelief run through his entire body as he recognized his former wife after all these long years. James pushed roughly through the crowd to reach the front near the stage. His mind was racing with questions and emotions he had not felt in years. He called out Grace's name loudly and everyone turned to look at him, wondering who this man was. Grace froze completely when she saw James standing there in his expensive designer suit, staring at her with wide eyes. The room fell silent as everyone sensed the sudden tension and drama unfolding. Samuel and Moses looked confused, not understanding what was happening at that moment. Grace's face had turned pale white, and she was shaking slightly. James stared at her, unable to believe she was really standing there alive after all these years, when he had convinced himself she was probably dead. James demanded to know who the boy was standing between Grace and Moses. His voice was loud and commanding, making everyone uncomfortable. Grace held Samuel close protectively and told James that Samuel was her son. James quickly did the math in his head, counting back 9 years, and realized Samuel must be the baby Grace was carrying that terrible night he threw her out. James declared loudly that Samuel was his son, and he wanted him back immediately. The audience gasped at this shocking revelation. Samuel looked up at his mother with frightened, confused eyes, not understanding who this angry rich man was. Grace told Samuel not to worry and held him even tighter against her body protectively, like a mother protecting her child from danger. Moses stepped forward bravely and told James he had absolutely no right to claim Samuel after abandoning him. Moses explained that he was the one who had raised Samuel with love and care all these years. He had fed him, clothed him, taught him, and loved him as his own son. Moses said he was Samuel's real father, not James, who had thrown them away like trash. James laughed cruelly and said Moses was just a poor, dirty hawker who could never give Samuel a good life like he could provide. James said Samuel deserved to live in a mansion with everything money could buy, not in some dirty shack. Moses replied that Samuel needed love, not money, and that was something James clearly knew nothing about because his heart was made of cold stone. The crowd watched in complete shock as the drama unfolded on stage before their eyes. Some people started recording everything on their phones, and others whispered among themselves, spreading gossip. The competition organizers did not know what to do as James and Moses argued back and forth. The hotel manager came and asked everyone to please calm down and take this matter elsewhere. James offered Grace money to take Samuel away from her. He said he would give her $5 million in cash, and she could live comfortably for the rest of her miserable life. James said Samuel deserved better than poverty, and he would give him everything. Grace refused firmly and said Samuel was staying with her and Moses. No amount of money could make her give up her precious son to a man who had abandoned them. James got extremely angry when Grace refused his generous offer. His face turned red, and he started shouting threats. James threatened to take them to court and use his money and power to win custody of Samuel. He said he would hire the best lawyers in the country and crush them completely. James told them they had no chance against him because he controlled the entire city with his wealth and influence. The crowd watched in shock as James continued his angry tirade. Some people felt sympathy for Grace and Moses, while others thought James had a right to his biological son. The competition organizers begged everyone to please leave the hotel as this was becoming too disruptive. But nobody moved because everyone wanted to see what would happen next in this dramatic confrontation. Samuel started crying because he was scared and confused by everything happening around him. He did not understand who this angry man was or why he was claiming to be his father. Samuel only knew Moses as his father, the man who loved him and took care of him every day. Grace knelt down and hugged Samuel tightly, trying to comfort him and calm his fears. Grace whispered in Samuel's ear that everything would be okay and nobody would take him away from her and Moses. Moses put his strong hand on Samuel's small shoulder and promised to protect him no matter what happened. James watched them together and felt something strange stirring in his chest that he had not felt in many, many years. It was an uncomfortable feeling he did not understand or want. The hotel security finally came and asked everyone to calm down immediately. They said this was not the proper place for such arguments and everyone should leave right now. James demanded they call the police, but Grace and Moses quickly left with Samuel before things got worse. They pushed through the crowd and took a bus back to their small home near the market, feeling scared and extremely worried about what would happen next. That long night, Moses and Grace did not sleep at all as they talked about what to do about James's threats. They knew James was extremely powerful and could use his unlimited money to take Samuel through the courts. Moses said he would fight with everything he had to keep his son. Grace agreed and they held each other close, praying desperately for a miracle to save their family. Samuel cried himself to sleep that night, still confused and frightened by the day's events. He had been so happy winning the competition, but now everything felt wrong and scary. Samuel heard his parents talking in worried voices late into the night. He pretended to sleep, but inside he was very afraid of the angry rich man who claimed to be his real father. The next morning, a big black expensive car stopped outside their small shack near the market. James stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and an expensive gold watch that probably cost more than their home. He knocked firmly on the wooden door, and Moses answered it. James said he wanted to talk peacefully this time and asked if he could come inside to discuss things calmly. Moses reluctantly let James in, and they all sat down on the thin mat on the floor. James looked around the tiny shack carefully and saw how poorly they lived in terrible conditions. He saw the many holes in the roof that leaked when it rained and the thin walls that barely kept the wind out. Samuel's school books were stacked neatly in the corner, and his small sleeping mat was rolled up beside them. James felt something very uncomfortable growing in his chest as he observed their poverty. He saw Grace's hands were rough and calloused from hard work, and Moses's feet were scarred from years of walking the streets selling fruits. Samuel sat between his parents looking at this rich stranger with curious and fearful eyes. James suddenly remembered the soft hands Grace used to have when he married her and felt something twist painfully inside him. James started speaking, and his voice was softer than before, though still proud. He said he had thought about everything all night long and barely slept. James admitted that he had made a terrible mistake 9 years ago when he threw Grace out while she was in labor. He said he had been cruel and heartless, and he was sorry for what he did that horrible night. But he said he wanted to make up for it now. Grace listened, but did not say anything yet. Her face showed no emotion as she stared at James. Moses held her hand tightly, waiting to hear what James would say next. Samuel sat quietly between his parents, looking at the rich man who claimed to be his father. James continued speaking and said he understood that he had no right to call himself Samuel's father after what he did all those years ago. James said he could see that Moses was a good man who clearly loved Samuel truly. He admitted that he had everything money could buy, but nothing that really mattered in life. James told them about his lonely life and how empty he felt despite all his wealth and great success. He said watching them together as a loving family made him realize what he had lost forever through his own cruelty and pride. James made a surprising offer to them all. He said he wanted to help them without taking Samuel away from his home. James offered to pay for Samuel's education at the best schools and university in the country, or even abroad. He would also give Moses money to start a proper business instead of hawking fruits on the dangerous streets every day. James said he would buy them a decent house so they would not have to live in this terrible shack anymore. But James added one important condition to his generous offer. He wanted permission to visit Samuel sometimes and be part of his life in some small way. He promised he would never try to take Samuel away from Moses and Grace ever. James said he just wanted a chance to know his son and maybe become a better man through knowing him. He said Samuel could call Moses father because that is who his real father was. Moses and Grace looked at each other for a very long time, not speaking. They did not trust James after what he had done to them, but they thought about Samuel's future and opportunities. They knew James's help could give Samuel chances and opportunities they could never provide with their very limited resources. Finally, Grace spoke and asked James why they should believe him after he had abandoned them and left them to die on the street. James had no good answer except to say he was truly sorry for what he had done. He admitted he did not deserve their trust or forgiveness, but he was asking for both anyway. James said he would put everything in legal writing so they would be fully protected. He promised on his life that he only wanted to help and be a small part of Samuel's life, nothing more. He said he understood now that money without love was meaningless, and he had wasted 9 years living in misery. Samuel listened to everything quietly and then spoke for the first time since James arrived. His voice was small but clear. Samuel said he did not know James at all, and Moses was his only father. But he said if this man truly wanted to help and would not hurt his family, then maybe they could give him a chance. Samuel said he would accept James's help for his education because he wanted to become a doctor someday to help poor people. Grace felt tears roll down her face as she listened to her wise young son speak with such maturity. Moses nodded slowly in agreement with Samuel's words. They decided to accept James's offer, but told him he must prove himself through his actions, not just his words. James agreed immediately and promised he would not let them down this time. He said he would spend the rest of his life trying to make up for his terrible mistakes. Over the following weeks, James kept his promise completely. He bought Moses and Grace a comfortable house in a good neighborhood with proper electricity and running water. It was not a mansion, but it was a real home with 3 bedrooms and a small garden where Grace could grow vegetables. Moses and Grace could not believe they were living in such a nice place after so many years in the small shack. James helped Moses start a proper fruit business with a real shop in the market. He provided all the capital Moses needed to stock the shop properly with fresh fruits and vegetables from good suppliers. Moses worked hard and his business began growing quickly because people knew him as an honest and kind man. Soon Moses was earning enough to support his family comfortably without struggling every single day. Samuel was enrolled in the best private school in the entire city. He received new uniforms, books, and everything he needed for his education. Samuel continued to excel in all his studies and made his parents incredibly proud. He never forgot where he came from and remained humble and kind to everyone he met regardless of their social status. True to his word, James visited once a month to see how Samuel was doing. At first, the visits were awkward and uncomfortable for everyone. Samuel was polite but distant with James. But slowly over many months, Samuel began to warm up to James a little bit. James would ask about Samuel's studies and listen with genuine interest to everything Samuel said about school and his dreams. James never tried to replace Moses as Samuel's father. He respected Moses completely and often thanked him for raising Samuel to be such a wonderful boy. Moses saw that James was truly trying to change and become a better person. The 2 men developed a careful respect for each other, built on their shared love for Samuel, even though their relationship would never be close. Grace forgave James eventually, but she never forgot what he had done to her. She saw that James was genuinely sorry and was trying to make amends for his cruelty. But Grace's heart belonged completely to Moses, who had saved her life and loved her through everything. She made this very clear to James, who accepted it with quiet sadness, knowing he had lost Grace forever through his own terrible actions. Years passed and Samuel graduated at the top of his class from the best private school. He won a full scholarship to medical school at the most prestigious university in the country. Moses and Grace attended his graduation ceremony with tears of pure joy and pride. James also attended, sitting quietly in the back, not wanting to intrude on their family moment, but wanting to witness Samuel's great achievement. Samuel became a doctor just as he had dreamed since he was a young boy. He specialized in helping poor people who could not afford medical treatment. Samuel opened a free clinic in the poor neighborhood where he had grown up. He treated patients without charging them anything, remembering the night his mother had needed help and a kind stranger had given everything to save them both. Moses and Grace grew old together, surrounded by love and happiness. Their small fruit business continued to thrive, and they had enough money to live comfortably. They never became rich like James, but they had something far more valuable. They had each other, and they had raised a son who made the world a better place through his kindness and medical skills. James lived alone in his big mansion for the rest of his life. He continued making money, but gave most of it away to charity, trying to make up for his past cruelty. James attended every important event in Samuel's life, always sitting quietly in the back. He was grateful for the small role he was allowed to play and never asked for more than he deserved. On his deathbed many years later, James called Samuel to his side one final time. He thanked Samuel for giving him a chance to be part of his life, even though he did not deserve it. James said knowing Samuel had been his greatest blessing, even though he had tried to throw that blessing away. Samuel held James's hand and forgave him completely, telling him to find peace. James died with tears running down his old wrinkled face, finally understanding what truly mattered in life. The story of Grace, Moses, and Samuel spread throughout the city and became famous. People told it to their children as a lesson about true love, kindness, and the worthlessness of wealth without compassion. The story taught that a person's value is not measured by money or status, but by the kindness in their heart and the love they give to others freely. Moses and Grace lived long, happy lives together and were buried side by side when their time came. Samuel stood at their grave with his own children and told them the story of how his mother had been thrown out on the street while in labor. He told them how a poor hawker with nothing had given everything to save 2 strangers. Samuel taught his children that true wealth is found in love and kindness, not in money or possessions. And so the story ends with an important lesson for all of us. Money and power mean nothing without love and compassion. The richest person in the world is the one who gives freely to others and loves without conditions. James had everything but was miserable and alone. Moses had nothing but was rich beyond measure because he had love in his heart and family by his side. Remember that kindness to strangers can change lives forever. One small act of compassion can create ripples that spread far and wide, touching many hearts. Never turn away from someone in need because you never know when you might need help yourself. Treat everyone with respect and dignity regardless of their social status or wealth. Thank you for watching this touching story. If it moved your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others so more people can learn these important lessons about love, kindness, and what truly matters in life. Leave a comment below telling us what you learned from this story. We love hearing from you. See you in the next video with another amazing story. God bless you all. This is Sage Tales Africa.